Hey y'all, welcome back to Real Talk with Dr. LaWanda Hill. I am the host, yours truly, and y'all are in for a treat. I am excited to be starting off our series on Black women practicing vulnerability. I have realized in my personal life and my professional work that the path to healing, the path to being better versions of ourselves, the path to achieving the relationship, success, intimacy, love, family, that connected family that we desire is through vulnerability. Vulnerability is essentially the key that unlocks better, more healed, evolved, higher versions of ourselves. I fundamentally believe that with my whole soul. But I also realize that for Black women, to be vulnerable is to be at risk for harm, is to be mishandled. The very systems that are set up to protect often are the very systems that, when we are vulnerable, sometimes cause us harm. So I realized that there's so much historical and generational trauma and hurt that Black women have that hold in their DNA and in their bodies that make vulnerability very, very hard. It's a very complex relationship that Black women have with vulnerability, and I understand why, because of our plight. But here, at Real Talk, we are going to bring in real people with real stories who can talk about their real journeys of walking through some of these challenges to become better versions of themselves. And I'm super excited to curate this series on practicing vulnerability because I do believe it's the key that unlocks better versions of ourselves. There's no one way to do vulnerability, and there's no simple way to be vulnerable. But I do believe one of the pieces of being of vulnerability, or of practicing it, is giving voice and speaking and sharing about whatever has impacted you, whether it has harmed you, what areas in your life you feel you need support in. But I have found for a lot of Black women, to give voice is not easy. To just speak, to share. And so we often do this thing called self-silencing. We don't give ourselves permission to share our emotions. We don't give ourselves permission to share our hurt, to share our disappointment, to share the fact that we are struggling, to share the fact that we've been messed over, to share the fact that we feel unseen, unheard. Self-silencing is a tool, it's a coping mechanism that we overutilize that may feel like it's protecting us, but in the long run, it's harmful. Anxiety for one, depression for another, isolation, hopelessness, powerlessness, depression, feeling like you're in a room full of people but feeling alone, or feeling like you have all these people around you but none of them know you, or feeling like you're walking through something by yourself with no support, and it's like you are screaming out internally for help, but you don't have the words to ask for it. So we're going to really dive into self-silencing, and I'm super excited because I really believe that in order for us to become these higher versions of ourselves, we really have to be real about what our challenges are, specifically as Black women, because we have very unique plights. Our challenges are different from the rest of the world. That's just fact. And so I think as we gather in community, and be vulnerable and be real, we can definitely become that better version of ourselves. So I'm super excited because I'm bringing in for this first part on self-silencing specifically my good friend, Dr. Akilah Reynolds, who is the co-founder of the Strong Black Woman Wellness Collaborative. I do believe that strength requires vulnerability. I don't think it is either or, and I don't believe vulnerability makes you weak. In fact, I think it makes you strong in light of everything that goes on around us that make this more challenging. And so Dr. Akilah and the co-founder, Dr. Martinique Jones, created the Strong Black Woman Wellness Collaborative because we understand that although we are strong, we still need to be well. And so we really are going to take a deeper dive into what that strong Black woman really means, what happens when we over-identify with it, and specifically, what happens when we get caught up in this pattern of silencing ourselves. So we're going to be real and talk about what that has looked like in Dr. Akilah's life and how she has overcome it. We both have gotten to this place of understanding that vulnerability is the key that unlocks, I would say, success evolution, happiness, love. Vulnerability is the key to almost everything, to be honest with you. And so, but I realized that a lot of us as Black women struggle with it on so many different levels, right? And so I want to talk personally and then professionally about why you think it is we struggle so much in this area specifically, because vulnerability is so broad. But in this area of, number one, just sharing your emotions and being open to allow closeness in. Like why do we struggle so much with that as Black women specifically?
I think a part of it is our socialization. Like, we have been combating racism and sexism, and then whatever other parts of your identity, that could be classism, that could be colorism, that could be ableism, all these other things. And so when society is against you, I feel like Black women over time have adopted these characteristics, particularly strength, that which we've talked about, the strong Black woman, in order to survive.
Right.
I think that we've learned that in order to make it in this world, we have to be a certain way. And sometimes I think that way in which we learned it wasn't vulnerability, because we had to survive. And when you're in survival mode, truth be told, like, it may not really be this time or space to, be crying on the floor or whatever you want to say. You need to focus on what you got to focus on.
Yeah.
And I think that we've kind of adopted that and then just used it over and over and over again, because it's been ingrained in us. And it's also helped us. I'm not going to lie, to some degree, it has definitely helped us survive in the face of all these challenges.
I think of our struggle with this is like an onion. There's several different layers that you got to peel back and peel back and peel back to get to the point. That. And I think one of the layers is definitely survival. Right. And a lot of Black women, because I believe the most disrespected, unprotected, neglected person in the world is the Black woman. And so a lot of times we didn't have, at least our ancestors, right? We think 2 generations removed. I think about my grandmother. Did not have permission or the time or the space or any system to protect them, really. Think about it. To be vulnerable, to share their emotions, to look for closeness, because they was always in survival mode. And I think that was adaptable. I think it served them. I'm even thinking about my experience as a kid. I was in certain spaces, certain schools, and then taken out of those spaces and put in magnet schools to challenge, like a more rigorous academic institution. And I just remember being like vulnerable, like, oh, I want to, know people, talk to people, and people who had been hardened, like by how they had grown up, was judgmental of that. And it was like, oh, she want to touch everybody. She must be gay, or she this and she that. And so I think early on you begin to learn, thank God it didn't stop me, that like show emotions and to show softness can be judged, or people can push you out. And I'm just thinking about so many people who live in spaces, who live in areas where to show their soft self may make people manipulate that or exploit that or take advantage of that. And on top of the systems outside of them, like you said, sexism and racism and all that, breaks my heart and makes me all the more committed, because it's just like, where do we get permission and where messages do we get to be vulnerable, knowing that it's the key to unlock so many different things?
I think that's an important point, that there's a protection to this. That a lot of times, and I can speak for myself, a part of what was keeping me from being vulnerable was protecting myself from people. I mean, I don't exactly know, because I don't feel like I had that big of a but it was like an emotional protection that for me, like my emotions, I was very sensitive. So I knew that like if I put something out there and, people responded in a particular way, or rejected me or did whatever, that it would really hurt me. And then I wouldn't even know what to do with my emotions. So it was very much a protection of my but for other people, I think it could be a protection from a lot of different things. A lot of the things that you mentioned make a lot of sense, and it would be a reason that I would have closed up in that particular situation, because I would be so afraid. So I think that luckily for you and happily for you, it didn't stop you. And I think for many women, it comes later maybe in life to learn.
That's good.
That this is keeping you from actually what you want. So the thing that you're afraid of is the thing that you need. And that's what I learned.
That's so like bomb.com, sunshine. It's like the thing that you want is the thing that you need. And it's the thing that's going to lead you to it. It makes me wonder, like, if you think back when you was growing up, like you have sisters, you come from a family of sisters. I only have 2. I have 7 brothers, but I have 2 sisters. Did you ever see a model of expressing emotions? And did you ever see a model of like bringing people in closeness to form those relationships. And as you think about that, I'm thinking about my mom. And I always felt like with her sisters, my aunts, she was always vulnerable. Like they're in difficulty and hardship, I would watch her go to them for that. So I feel like in some way that was kind of like priming me for like, okay, if you're having a hard time, you need to go get support, or they're sisters, right, who's supposed to show up for you. I didn't ever see her express any emotions.
I have a similar experience because I was like, what, to some degree, I had an example of a mom who was very friendly, very outgoing, and shared and didn't really care what people thought about her.
Shout out to Miss Reynolds.
Yeah, right. And so I had a lot of girlfriends and, had a sister that was like her best friend, and she would commune with these women. And so I had an example that like, you should have these relationships with people that you can depend on and that you can go to support. And I also didn't see the emoting. I didn't see the emotions. So my mom wasn't emotionally like expressive of things, sadness, or disappointment, like that kind of stuff. And in fact, I think my mom tried to toughen me in her ways that I think like for her, it was very much, I think it was clear for her that, she was a tough person and probably I need to be a tough person. I remember distinctly when I would start school, she would always be like, if someone hits you, what do you do? And it was the beginning of every school year. I'm like, I know, Mom, hit them back, like, and I
protect yourself,
and in hindsight, I'm like, why is she telling me that? Like, but she made it a point to tell me like to stand up for myself. But the emotional piece of things, like how I was feeling, that wasn't really kind of what we learned. And I don't think that many people, at least in the family, had space for that. I will say the one emotion that I did learn being in a house of women to like express is anger. That was the one emotion that you could freely express. That's kind of the feisty pieces of me were like, at some point, if you anger me, you will see like a strong emotion. And it's acceptable in a sense of, I gotta stand up for myself. But in terms of other emotions that I think are maybe a little bit more difficult or even just handling anger differently, I didn't have that model.
And I don't think a lot of us had it. Like I'm thinking about my mama. I saw anger. That's it. And she would do the same. So I'm from the country. So my mama's message a little bit different. She was like, if you go to school and somebody who's bigger than you hit you or whatever, you may not be able to take them, but you need to hook your teeth in them, like fight them, like bite them. And I was like, and I remember thinking, oh man, so I wouldn't get in trouble if I got suspended. I could actually fight. They understood that the world is not safe for us. It's not always considerate of us. And so they taught us how to protect ourselves. So they taught us to be strong, right? They taught us to be bold. They taught us to express anger when necessary, but they never taught us about what happens, because underneath that anger is a layered emotion. Underneath that anger is sometimes hurt and disappointment and fear and sadness. And so then we learn that there's no space for that we can't, express that. And so when we can't express that, we can't get support and help for that. So I really think that that's a perfect segue into the strong Black woman schema that you and Dr. Jones have so brilliantly co-founded in terms of the collaborative. So talk to us a little bit about that schema, because it came from somewhere, right? And we adopted it and then we started practicing it, but it also became kind of a barrier in some ways to our vulnerability.
It has a historical origin in the sense of it is something that has been passed down for generations to generation of Black women in this country, at least. And it may be seen in Black women in other countries. I can't really speak to that, but I know that for Black Americans, we had to be strong to survive. So you can see strength, some form of it being passed down from slavery to the Jim Crow South to current day. And there are three main characteristics of the strong Black woman, although there are other ones. And the first one is like independence. So you'll see like Black women, like I know Black women who said like, you know what, it's better if I do it myself. Like I can't depend on anyone. I can't trust anyone. If I want to get something done, I got to get it done myself. And I see that theme over and over in Black women, over and over in myself and the women in my family. The second one is caretaking, but it's not just taking care of other people. It's taking care of other people at your own expense. This is why we might see a lot of Black women who are sick themselves, who have poor health themselves, who emotionally are drained, emotionally, their mental health is kind of just really bad or just not doing well, but they are still caretaking for their husbands, for their boyfriends, for their girlfriends, for friends, family, whoever. And then the last one is emotional fortitude. So this idea that no matter what happens, I have to be emotionally strong. I can't let things get in the way. I can't express my emotions. And with that is this idea of self-silencing, where you don't really express your emotional self. You don't really express yourself or how you feel. And that is sort of probably one of the most dangerous aspects of it. Because what we're seeing is that some of the connection between the strong Black woman schema and then these mental health, these markers of mental health distress, like depression or anxiety, one of the pathway to that, the pathway to the strong Black woman schema and depression is self-silencing. So good. It's the idea that you're not expressing yourself, and it's through that not expression that you're internalizing it, and emotionally, you're not doing very well.
I just see the pathway so vividly, right? Like I can see Black women walking down this pathway of self-silencing, like something happens and they just eat it and they just swallow it and they just keep going, and it's walking down to a journey of depression, it's walking down to a journey of anxiety, it's walking down a journey of isolation, of deflation, of hopelessness, of powerlessness. And I am here to break that journey, right? You can pivot and go right. So I want you to think back, like when, if you can recall, you had enough with self-silence.
It's funny that we were talking about kind of the vulnerability piece, and that like I kind of learned it in grad school, because that was a part of it. And when you talk about like you get something and you eat it, what was going on for me was that over time I would go through something and I'd be like, oh, that's not that bad. You know what I mean? Like, or whatever, that happened, I didn't like it, but who cares? I'm going to just keep going. And it was like I was just adding more baggage. By the time that I got into the PhD program, I had so much emotional baggage and I just couldn't carry that any longer. So I started to break down, like emotionally, I just was not in a good place, to the point where I had to get therapy, and I had multiple stints in therapy, but it wasn't until probably, I don't know what year that was. It must've been my 4th year in grad school. It wasn't until then that I said, I cannot, and I will not do that anymore. And I would say that my research of the strong Black woman actually helped me with that, because I was in my advisor's office, and this actually this predated that a little bit. So I had a professional experience of it, and I had a personal experience. I was looking at my thesis, and, it was on stereotypes about Black women. Yeah. So I'm seeing that Black women are rejecting things like the Jezebel, and rejecting things like Sapphire, which is like the angry Black woman, but they are endorsing the strong Black woman. And so I'm like, well, why are they rejecting these two, but endorsing this one? And it dawns on me, I'm having this conversation like, wow, like, duh, Akilah, because you're a strong Black woman, and literally everyone is also a strong Black woman. They may not identify with these other scripts, but they most certainly identify with this. And that's when my wheels started turning, like, okay, professionally, this is something. And personally, I see it now that I was raised by a strong Black woman. I was raised with strong Black woman, and I am a strong Black woman, and I identify with this so much that it's hard for me to let it go, and it's hard for me to be. So then it was so much a part of me, because like it felt like I didn't have permission to be vulnerable. It felt like, because sometimes when I would even share little pieces of me, like breaking down little pieces of like, oh, I need therapy, for example, I wouldn't get the reaction that I wanted. I wouldn't get the like, oh, well, go find a therapist, or like, let me help you, or what's going on. It was more of like, get over it, don't be
same. Figure it out.
Right. It's not that big of a deal. Don't be a wimp, that kind of stuff. And so personally in grad school, when I just emotionally couldn't take it anymore. And I started to realize this is really impacting my life. And I felt depressed at one point where I was just not well. Like I don't know. I just wasn't myself. And I knew that unless I speak up, unless I share what's going on, then I'm not going to feel good. Really, my pathway to feeling better is sharing.
Not feeling like you have permission to be vulnerable, I think is something that a lot of Black women can identify with and that they can relate with. And so you started this episode by saying, you're going back to your therapist. You started with her with your infertility journey. What was different about this infertility journey that you were like, no more silencing? I know how this is. And what was the benefits of not silencing yourself? Because a lot of Black women don't talk about that. I mean, we have Gabrielle Union who's opened up about that. I believe in Becoming with Michelle Obama. She talks a little bit, not necessarily infertility. She just talks about
IVF.
And her conception journey. But a lot of women don't talk about that. So I'm curious, what was different this time for you as you began to kind of share the difficulty of that process?
This was about last year, maybe in the summertime, where I had a procedure. And it was like, I don't know exactly. It's like, basically it was looking at my fallopian tubes essentially. And it was like a radiologist, and it's kind of like an x-ray. So essentially they were putting dye at my vagina, and on the screen, I should see like my fallopian tubes, and I should see the dye. It was the most painful procedure I had ever had in my life. Wow. Like I was in so much pain, just screaming. Long story short, at the end of that, I was like first of all, so the procedure was just painful to me emotionally and physically. The radiologist didn't do something right. So then she had to call another radiologist. They had to come in, and I could tell that something was going on, because you know how you like, I don't remember what she was saying, but it was the way that she was talking to these people. I was like, something's not right. And so at the end, I'm just laying on the table, just kind of, I felt traumatized in the moment, like maybe a small T, and I couldn't move. I just was still. And so I was like that for a couple of minutes. Then I got myself up. And by the way, like this was COVID, so I couldn't have anyone in the room with me. I had to experience it by myself. And I called the nurse in and I said, can you have the doctor come back? Because she had told me, but it hadn't quite clicked. I heard her, but I didn't hear her. So she came back, and I had Sean was like outside the hospital or whatever. So they let him come in. And then I called my sister because I needed them to witness this and to process it. And I asked her, like, what does this mean? And she basically was saying,
this is a nurse, right?
Yeah. Okay. That my tubes were blocked. And this could be a cause for infertility. And it shattered me. Like when I tell you it shattered me, because this has been my dream my entire life. Yeah. Like it had always been something that I wanted. And I figured that when I was ready, it would happen. Yeah. The last couple of years, I have felt that something was wrong. I have felt I wasn't trying to have a child, but I just internally, I knew that something wasn't quite right. Now there was another issue that was there, and I knew so I knew that was the issue, but there was a second thing. This thing kind of surprised me essentially. Yeah. After that, I, was very clear. So we came up with a plan, blah, blah, blah. So there was a plan in place, but it was like, what if that doesn't work? Or, how long is this going to take? What if I could never have a kid? And that was the thing that was playing in my mind, because it was something that I really wanted so badly. And I think a part of it for many women, like our identities kind of become a part of this, and we get socialized into this. So a part of it was me for sure, but also a part of it was probably, I would bet, like the socialization that like, this is what mothers do, look who like, you are, right? This is who you are. I would randomly cry. Like I'd be just crying after that, just in the closet. I would go cry. I have a big closet, so it's not gonna
it was your space. Like you had your own space to be able to do what you needed to do.
Yeah. And so when I was doing that, and then also, mind you, I had started a new job, and then I had added an additional job. So I was really transition forward. Yeah. And it was a lot going on. I had a lot of transitions. I had family stuff happening. And then also like my career, like there was a lot of good stuff in my career, but I felt like I couldn't be me. So I knew that in order for me to make it through the next couple of months, whether I was able to conceive or not conceive, I needed to go to therapy to express this, because I needed to be able to come to terms with whether or not this is going to happen. And I needed to get to a place of acceptance no matter what.
What you say, I love. I need to express this. I need to let this out. I need to reconcile it. I need to face it, is what I'm hearing you say. I need to face this. I need to express this. And the most important thing that I hear that I feel is so important that I want to pause and stress, when you have so much weight carrying you down, pulling you down, right? From stressors to difficulty to adjustment, because even adjustment is still stress on the body, you know?
Yeah.
Your response was not, let me just push through by any means necessary. Let me just take it on. Let me just keep swallowing it. Your previous experiences said, nope, that's not the pathway. I'm going to pause. I'm going to express it. I'm going to get support. And that is a beautiful message that I really hope that all the women who are watching, Black women specifically, who struggle with an over-identification with the strong Black woman, can really be able to see and hear, like, when you are experiencing more and carrying more, that is not the time to push through. That is the time to get support and help.
It is, because it got to the point where I was becoming so stressed that I said, either I stop working so much or I go to therapy. And I didn't want my career to stop. Like I was moving, and I was like, I want this. This is exciting for me. In order to do this, I have to express this over here. And so my choice was, I'm going to therapy. I don't really care how much it costs. I'm going to pay for it, because if I don't do that, then that means that my career is going to suffer, and what I want in my life is going to suffer, because I can't hold this and then hold all this space for other people and be doing all this other stuff. I just can't do it all.
It's not going to happen. And I want to tell you, I am so incredibly proud of you. One, for your journey, for your vulnerability, for your sharing. There's a beautiful, handsome baby boy that came on the other side of that process. You're healthy. And I know it wasn't without pain. I know it wasn't without struggle. And so I hope that it really, really helped somebody. And it really helped me too, as an older Black woman. I think we all are coming up in a generation where we waited later to have kids.
Yeah.
We pursue education and career first. And that is not a bad thing for all of the hotel crazies out there. Like, it is not a bad thing to do that. It's okay. And that means we're having kids at later ages. And that's something that I experienced just across my cohort of people. So I know that it's a norm. And so fertility, the sooner you know where you stand with fertility, the better. And so I want to just thank you publicly for encouraging me to figure out, where I even stand fertility wise. I don't know. And I will know soon. It's the vulnerability in our relationship that it's like, oh, well, let me go check this out. Let me go see, right? Because when we share, we don't know whose life we're going to change. We don't know who we're going to help. We don't know who is going to benefit from our vulnerability, and also it's going to benefit us. So I feel like it's a win-win all around.
I would agree. Everything you said. Yeah.
From your personal journey and your professional lens, what is it that you would say to a Black woman right now who may be struggling with self-silencing and expressing themselves? What would you say to them?
I would say start. Start somewhere. You may not be where you're going to go to therapy right away, or you may not be to the point where you're going to go tell, a friend your deepest and darkest, situation. But I would say just start. And if you want to just start by expressing yourself on paper, start there.
That's good.
Start by just getting in touch and being still, and even allowing yourself to figure out what you feel. I think a lot of times for us, we don't even know what we're experiencing. We can't even identify our emotions. We're just moving. That we're oftentimes moving from situations, something happens, straight to a behavior. Straight to some sort of coping mechanism that we may not even recognize as coping. We may be doing stuff that is coping, and then it long-term may not be the most effective way to cope, but maybe we're just kind of like pushing down our emotions and kind of just managing it in order to manage our emotions that we don't even know we're managing. So I would definitely encourage people to really be in touch with their emotions and to be still. And to start with someone, when it comes to like expressing and being vulnerable with people, start with someone that you trust. Start with someone that you find is good at being vulnerable. Like, so for you, or from one of my other friends that I had known, you two were people that I knew were vulnerable. And so I would say just start with people like that, or start with people who are safe.
Yeah.
And I truly encourage people to try therapy.
Yeah.
And if one therapist doesn't work for you, try again, until you find this therapist in a situation that really is helpful for you.
I think that message of just starting somewhere, whether it be with yourself by giving voice to it, right? Writing it down, exploring what you even feel, and then sharing with someone who is a good model of vulnerability. And if you don't have that model, to seek professional help to help with that. I think that those are 4 great, tips and tools to start moving away from self-silencing. And there are so many resources out there, y'all. There's Therapy for Black Girls. That's a resource you can go to find. There's the Black Girl Doctor, which you are part of, right, Dr. Akilah? My practice is dedicated to servicing Black women with these specific issues. And there's inclusive therapists, where you can find therapists who are vetted to be thoughtful and sensitive to Black women and their culture. So there's amazing resources out there for us to be able to go get the help and support we need. So we're going to heal, y'all. We're going to heal. And we heal by, telling our stories, our unique journeys, our different narratives that have impacted us as we are trying to become higher versions of ourselves. So I'm grateful. I'm very, very grateful for you, for your friendship and your vulnerability. Thank you so much for joining us and being with us. I know that every woman who watches this is going to benefit. So thank you so much for your vulnerability.
Thank you for having me. It's always great to be with you and be a part of this. So I appreciate it. I love what you're doing.
I think it's very important for us to be in community, to gather and hear real stories from real people who have real expertise, as well as their own personal touch with some of the struggles that make it challenging for us to become better versions of ourselves. And I'm very appreciative of Dr. Akilah. And I want to say that this is one of those episodes that you want to save and you want to listen to more than once, because it's so many layers. I hope that this episode has done for you what it has done for me. I always enjoy joining with Dr. Akilah. She has so much expertise on that strong Black woman script that we all identify with, but she also has a personal journey that has been amazing and phenomenal to watch. So I hope that you, if you have felt moved by this episode, that you will share it with somebody. Be sure to like the episode. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we are just getting started, y'all. Vulnerability is like an onion. You got to keep peeling it because it has so many layers, especially as Black women. We are anything but simple. We are very complex, and we have so many different layers that we're going to peel down each episode as we really unpack this Practicing Vulnerability series. So y'all stay tuned. There's more to come. It gets better. See y'all next time on Real Talk with Dr. LaWanda Hill.